conversations. Let's have real conversations.
Get ready to stir it up.
Life events and everything in between. Let's go.
Get ready to stir it up.
No capping. If guests got you covered right up.
Get ready to stir it up. Stir it up.
Come on.
Get ready to stir it up.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Stir It Up. Today I have my sister, well my big sister and friend, Naa and I here with us. And Naa and I are going to be talking about giving our children a voice. And it's around parenting and how our world is changing. And how do we raise our kids in a way that they have a voice.
That's right.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So just kind of setting a bit of context. So you and I are from slightly different generations, right? And I think, but there are lots of similarities in terms of there's overlap, right? And what you find is the definition of what a good child was an obedient child. A child who did what they were told.
True.
A child who was, compliant. So you wake up in the morning, you do your chores, you go to school, you pass exams. You don't talk back.
Yeah. Obey before you complain.
Obey before complain. and that was a good child. And today, I don't think that's a bad child, right? I still think that's a good child.
True,
if I'm going to be complete.
If you're a mother.
Yes, because I do want that. I do want my child to, because those are children that are easier, they are more malleable, and they're easier to raise. And you don't want children who have too many opinions sometimes, right?
That's true.
But our world has changed, and our kids are not competing with just kids who are in their cultural context. They're competing with kids all over the world. What do you think? How are our kids today, and what do we need to do to make them ready for the world? And is it important to even give them a voice to start with?
It's totally important to give them a voice. But I guess it's how you give them the voice, right? So you can't give them a voice without taking into account our cultural setting. And our cultural setting is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we go on a lot about, but this is happening in the West and that's happening in the West and the rest of the world. Actually, it's not the whole world. So I'll give you a typical example. Indian children are given a voice. They're one of the most successful immigrant groups in the UK. But the one thing they haven't forgotten about is their culture. So they've managed to blend the two together, right? So there's respect, but there's a voice. So our challenge in this part of the world is to be able to give our children the voice, but to do it responsibly, right? So I'll give you a typical example where I was having a conversation with my son, and I think I've shared this with you before, where I said something to him and he said, "Mommy, you know what you're saying doesn't make sense." And it startled me for a second, and I said, "Well, you know something?" I said, "But you can't say that to an adult, right? So I want to hear your opinion, but what you need to do is reframe that conversation." So then I said to him, "So what you say to me is, Mummy, what you said, I didn't understand what you said. Can you please explain it to me again?" Because it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you say to an adult, what you said doesn't make sense, you're insulting them, right? So whatever country you're in, it will not be received correctly. So it's about giving our children a voice, but also teaching them as parents how they use that voice responsibly. So it's not a voice you just use because you can use it, right? Yes, the world is changing. Our children need to be able to be curious. They need to be able to ask questions. Because if you're not asking questions, if you're not the child who is, trying to explore possibilities, then you will be left behind. And it's also this thing about teaching our children not to be afraid to have a voice. Because again, the flip side of it, of even being safe, right? We know that a lot of abuse, people will tell the children, don't say anything to anyone. If you say to someone, keep it quiet. And if you haven't brought up your child to have a voice, to be able to say anything they want to say to you within boundaries, doing it respectfully, what happens is that that child will never speak out. They will internalize it, and later on it's a problem. So being able to ask questions is important. Totally.
You know, when you're talking about, Mommy, what you're saying doesn't make sense. Just even 5 minutes ago, I was busy asking Madam Executive Producer here a question. A question of a bit of an adult nature, and some wandering child answers the question, and I'm like, but I wasn't talking to you. And she says, but it was a general question to the room. I'm like, but it wasn't a
general question to the room, right?
You know,
yeah.
And it is, and to an extent, she was right, you know, because it was a general question. I threw it out there.
That's right.
And it's finding that fine balance between allowing her to share an opinion, but also her knowing that when to speak and when not to speak.
Absolutely.
You know, and the example you give about Indian children, you are so spot on. Very high achievers, CEOs of many global companies, do well, extremely well academically, but rich cultural heritage.
Totally.
Do not lose sight of where they've come from, and how do they get that right? And it's however millions of people, very competitive environments that they grow up in, right? But that balance seems to be there. So it might be worth me reading a bit about that and kind of understanding.
And I mean, point in case, we have an Indian Prime Minister in the UK. Who would have thought, right? And it's because it's so key that they have not lost sight of their culture. So a typical Indian family, when the woman marries, they live with their parents, right? So there's always an adult in the house. There's always grandmother in the house. You go to a library, grandmother who does not speak a word of English is in the library with the child. Those children come home to adult supervision. They are taught to respect their aunties. So the respect is a given in their culture. Yet they're allowed to have a voice, right? So they're allowed to go to school. They're well educated, like you said, and they're allowed to have a voice. But at home, they're still taught this context of, you know, you don't talk. They still have this thing where you don't talk when adults are talking. So if they had visitors, the children know that mom has a visitor, you know, I'm not going to come and sit here and be part of that conversation. And I do it with my children. My children know that, you know, when you come to my house, so you know. My children, you say hello to Auntie Ekwa, but the conversation Mommy and Auntie Ekwa are going to have is none of your business. So you move off. And I hear many people who would say, oh, but times have changed. The children of today, and then they allow their children to be part of a conversation they shouldn't be part of. You know, I've known cases where children go and say things to other children that they heard at home that their parents were talking about somebody else's family. That is wrong. That's not what we are talking about when we say give your child a voice. So it's about keeping our context. That, you know, this is who we are, but at the same time being able to say to your child, you and I can have any conversation. And it's really important that your child can have any conversation with you, but they must learn the boundaries of that conversation and not do it in a disrespectful manner.
So parenting is complex, right?
Tell me about it.
There's no manual, like they say.
Absolutely.
And I've always maintained that I'm fine being a villain as a parent. And the reason why I maintained that position was I'm a carer, I'm a custodian of a child. And my role is not necessarily to be your friend.
That's true.
That's where I started from.
So did
right?
I.
And so I will raise you and I will teach you and I will be there to guide and nurture you.
Totally.
As I've evolved as a parent, I think that I have recalibrated elements of that point of view where I am learning to be a little bit more adaptive and more, and kind of imbibe a few elements of being a friend to my children.
Absolutely.
And that's just because I'm realizing that if I do not begin to include a bit of a peer relationship in some parts of our relationship, other people will raise my children for me.
Agreed.
Right.
Totally.
So I guess like everything in this world, it's not a hard and fast rule.
Exactly.
And so there are times when I'm a villain and it's my way or the highway,
Yeah.
and you will do as I say. And I hated that when I was a child. But now I kind of see where my dad was coming from in some of those conversations where, no, when you are old enough and you have your own place, you go do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And this is my home, you follow the rules, right? And there are some places where I'm willing to compromise and I'm willing to have a conversation and I'm willing to listen a lot more than speak, because that is the way that I'm able to understand your point of view. I don't know, what do you think about?
I totally agree with you. You know, it's this thing where we think it's static. It doesn't have to be static because it evolves. Children grow, right? So what is appropriate for your 3-year-old is no longer appropriate for an 18-year-old. So my son is going to be 18, and he keeps on harboring on that. And he will say to me, you know, I'm going to be 18 and technically I'm an adult, and you know, you can't...
Technicality.
Technically I'm an adult. And I'm like, yeah, I know you're going to be an adult, but you see, I pay the bills.
Yeah.
I feed you, right? So when you go and pay your own bills or you live in your own house, you can do what you like. But so far as you live in my house and I'm paying the bills and I put food on your table, I get some kind of authority, a little bit of authority over you. But I'm also conscious that it's evolved, right? So yes, he's going to be 18. So I have more conversations with my son. I try to reason more with my son than obey before control. But there are things where I would absolutely say, absolutely not. So case in point is last Christmas, he comes and he says he and his friends are going to Kukrobite. Who are you going with? My friends. Who's taking you? My friend's driver. So I'm like, okay, I need a little bit more detail here, you know? And he gets upset because why am I asking all those questions? He's going to the beach. I said, yeah, but you're going to the beach. I need to know. And he says, I said, but there'll be water there, which killed him completely. And I said, well, you know something? If you're not willing to give me the details that I need, then you're not going. And so I did not let him go. And all he had to do was have that dialogue with me, which gives me information, and he wasn't willing to do that. So afterwards, you know, he was so upset because he ended up being the only child who didn't go. And afterwards, we had a conversation, and I said, you know something? You have a voice, so you need to use it, but you need to use it appropriately. When I ask you questions, I'm asking you questions so that I make an informed decision. It's not because I'm either going to say no or yes or whatever, right? But you assume because I'm asking you questions, it's going to be a no. I said, you're going to Kukrobite. I need to know who's driving the car, right? I would be an irresponsible mother if somebody walked into the house and said, oh, where's Papana? He's going to Kukrobite. Who did he go with? I don't know. Whose house has he gone to? I don't know. Who's driving him? I don't know. He said his friend's I mean, seriously.
Which friend?
Which friend? And I don't even know which friend. Seriously?
Yeah.
So you know something? The second time, he
had all the detail, I'm sure.
Yes, he had all the details because you need to be able to engage with me, right? And I will give you that opportunity to be engaging with me. But it's my house and it is my rules because children need boundaries, right? The brain, like any part of your body, continues to evolve, continues to grow. So a child at 3 or a child at 4 can have a voice, but they can't make certain choices, because the brain is not equipped to make those choices, right? That's why you're the parent, you know, but as they evolve, they have to become our friends, especially in the era we live in, right? You and I, before we could speak to a friend, you probably had to look for a landline phone, right? And you were lucky if your house, you had a landline phone. So your meetings with your friends is, I'm going to my friend's house, which your parents have to give you permission to go, and chances were you weren't going to get that permission every day. Our children are on their phones 24/7 with their friends, right? They don't need to leave your house to have conversations.
To engage with
other people. So if you're not their friend, they will find, as you said, rightfully said at the beginning, somebody else will fill that gap. Social media will fill that gap. There are groups, you know, there are groups where your children can commit suicide, and they have people who would help them commit suicide, right? That's extreme. So if your child can't come to you and can't speak to you, that is a problem. They have to be able to tell you anything and everything. And you as the adult has to be wise in being able to direct them and to hear. A lot of times we don't listen.
And when they ask you the question, you need to be willing to give them truthful answers, because someone will give them answers which are 60% truth or 30% truth, and opinions and so on that might not necessarily be accurate.
That's right. I mean, who do you want to raise your child?
Yeah.
Somebody on the social media, or on Instagram, or well, my children say they don't use Facebook, so TikTok.
No, right now. So there's a lady who helps me managing some of my, stuff, right? As I do Stir It Up. And the two of us call Facebook the old people's home.
Oh, yes.
That's what we call it now.
It's true. My children.
We are naughty girls. And so I said to her, we're going to do this. And she says, yeah.
No, my children tell me, Facebook, who uses Facebook? Mommy, what are you talking about? Snapchat, Instagram.
So she laughs at me every time I say, I'm going to do something with you. She says, you're going to the old people. I say, Cinda, is that what you're calling us?
Absolutely. My children think, Facebook, what's that? But the truth is, anything, they can get any information about anything. You think about it, it's on the internet. Our children are on the internet all the time. They're taking, if they can't come and talk to you, they'll talk to their peers.
Yes, yeah.
So at some point, it has to be a friendship as well. A friendship with boundaries. So they know, and there are times you have to be mum, but there are times too you have to be a friend, so that they can tell you anything. I mean, these days, I try not to be outraged. Before I'd be outraged.
And not react to everything that they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I try so hard not to be outraged, because sometimes the things they will come up with, you're thinking, okay, this would never happen in my childhood.
Do I look like I wash my face this way?
Exactly. And a lot of times I say to my children, I would never have dared stand in front of my mom or my dad
and say that.
And say what you just said, because that hand would have come out. It would have been a dirty slap straight away, So I'm learning not to be outraged, because what I've noticed is when you're outraged, they clamp up. Yeah. They won't say it again. They won't come to you again with that thing. They come and tell you something their friend is doing that sounds like the most outrageous thing. You kind of have to bite your tongue and kind of swallow, and then listen to the story, and then find a way of advising your child, So I would say things like, okay, but that's not who we are, right? The home you come from.
Or even asking them how they feel about it, right?
That's right.
Because it's interesting, sometimes they actually condone what has happened.
Oh, yeah.
And so there are times when a story's been shared with me, I go straight into judgment, and I'm getting looks. And I'm like, yeah, that was not the right response. Hey, keep it tight.
Totally.
Right?
Oh, you have
so
to.
I've learned now that, so how do you feel about this?
Yeah.
Right?
That's smart.
And then what that does for me is I get her opinion, or I get their opinion. And then that helps me kind of know how to respond.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Education as a way of giving our kids a voice.
Yeah.
In the classroom, it's meant to be a safe space where kids can ask questions.
That's right.
And kids can learn. And a big part of learning is curiosity. And a lot of our regular schools, and not the schools, the international schools, the child who asks questions is too known. The curious child is the child that's challenging the teacher.
Yeah.
Shut up, you're a know-it-all.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's the child that's going off to solve problems, because the child that understands it, asking questions is a way of learning, right?
Totally.
But I don't think all our teachers understand that. How are we, what could we be doing differently with our learning systems? And I know you are close to education in many ways, with the work you do with the boards that you sit on, and how you support education both in the church and in traditional academia. What could we be doing differently from an education standpoint?
I think first thing is how we train our teachers, right? You can't give what you don't know. It's as simple as that, right? So if you're trained in a particular way and you were sitting in a classroom where you couldn't ask questions, and that's your training, and no one has come out to train you any differently. You can only deliver what you know, right? So there's a whole thing around training, right? Where they themselves have to be willing to ask questions, have to be okay to ask questions, right? If they couldn't ask questions of their lecturers when they were in university, and that's what they've been taught, what do you expect them to do when they're in the classroom? And that is a huge problem for us as a nation, right? Because we are creating children and people in the workplace who will only do what they're told, who won't challenge the status quo, who won't be innovative and bring different ideas. Because if I bring a different idea, I'm challenging my boss, right? My boss is not going to take kindly into it. Maybe what you have is actually better than what your boss is proposing, but you're not willing to even articulate that. That is a problem for a nation that needs to develop, right?
We need to learn to hire people who are smarter than us.
Oh, goodness me, totally, and grow them. That's the other thing. We're always so afraid of growing people because we think when we grow them, they'll take over our job. Actually, they should take over our job and do a much better job of it than we do. And that, for me, is a sign of an extremely good leader. A good leader knows they must grow talent, nurture talent, give talent every opportunity to grow and soar. And if they soar better than you, that's job well done, you know. But this is not a society that agrees with that, right? No. This is not a society.
This is the angle.
Exactly. I must always do much better than you do, and I must always be the one who's more successful than you are. And that is a failure. It is a failure because it means that we are not nurturing talent. And you know, how do you grow a system when you're not nurturing talent and you're not giving them the wings to soar and to do better? We want to grow the nation, people have to do better than we are doing. You know, and I'm really passionate about this, as you know. I mean, it is a travesty the way we teach our children and not allow them to have a voice. You know, the classroom should be the safest place where a child doesn't understand something or they've gone to do their other reading. So what we are doing is we're not even encouraging them to read widely, right? Because if I go and read widely and I have a different opinion,
I can't share it.
I can't share it. I can't come into the classroom and say to my economics teacher, actually, you know something, I read this in, you know, the FT or whatever, and what do you think about it? I actually don't agree, you know, with some of the things we just discussed, you know. Can we discuss? I mean, he'll be like,
but...
I mean, who do you think you are? Yeah. Right? You know, and people are afraid because I know sometimes these lecturers and teachers can be punitive. So the children are afraid. I want to get top marks. I don't want my teacher to...
So I'll keep my head down.
Yeah, I'll keep my head down. And I won't do the extra that I need to do.
But even for me, right, I'm even thinking about the quality of people who are going into education sometimes.
Not sometimes, a lot of the time.
I need to be decorous because my grandmother was an educationist. So I'm also being cautious how I put it.
no, but I totally get.
But that's all she ever wanted to do, right? So I know for sure it wasn't about the quality. That's all. And it's interesting. I was talking to about it a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, "That's all my grandmother wanted to do her entire life. She wanted to be a teacher." You know, so it's a lot of people are going into education because that's all they can do. They couldn't get into their first or second choice courses, and so this is what it's almost like that's the bottom of the barrel.
Absolutely.
But the question is, in the Scandinavian countries, you need to be the top of your class
just going to point out
to be
Sweden
able to go
to
into education.
Absolutely.
And is that how we need to start looking at education in our parts of the world?
Totally. I mean, sorry to cut you short,
no,
but I mean.
Fine.
Totally. I was going to use Sweden as an example. In Sweden, you cannot be a teacher if you don't have a master's or a PhD. You just can't be. But the difference is they're paid very well. So a teacher in Sweden will earn what a doctor in Sweden will earn, right? That's how much they value, they place on education. And if you think about it, these are the people who are going to impact knowledge, right? So if you pay them a pittance, what do you expect, right? So your top students are not the students who are going to want to be teachers. Your A-star students who go to university and get a first class will be running away from that classroom. Whereas actually, you need your students who do well. You need the students who excel to be the ones in the classroom impacting. So it's the way we pay them, it's the value system we have on teachers. And so what is happening is people are doing teaching because it's for want of something to do. They're not passionate about it. It's a job to do till they find something better. You know, are they really sitting down preparing curriculum? No. Are they learning what's going on in the other parts of the world? Do they want to improve? Are they using
tools? Are they using technology
to support the yeah. Of course not, right? But if you haven't put a system that nurtures them in the first place, really, truly, you know, why would you? And you know, and let's be honest, how many of us would actually tell our children after the kind of education and money we've put in them, and they come to you and they say, I want to go and teach in Ghana?
We say yes.
Yeah. How many of us?
Yeah. It's interesting, as you're talking about this, the other thought that jumped out at me is even how we as parents, and you and I have done enough work around, you know, parents and teach around with the PTA to know even how we as parents treat teachers.
Absolutely.
Right? And as a result, how does that even impact them and the work that they do?
That's right.
And so we're expecting these teachers to give help, empower our children and give them a voice. But we are not even giving the teachers a voice.
Exactly. You know, and so it's a whole cultural shift on how we view teachers and understanding how important that job is, how important, how critical that role is to us as a nation, to us as families, and giving them the respect that they deserve, right? Because they do deserve that respect. And
I can spend more time with them than they spend with us.
And the truth is, how many of us actually ever went back to see a teacher who had a huge impact in your life and said thank you? You know, there was a teacher in GIS, my children's school, who died, Mrs. Bao, of blessed memory. And I remember Mrs. Bao one day saying to me, you know, now tell parents we are not their enemies. Because when your children do well, they do well for you. And it's something that has never left me because it's so true. When you do well, I remember a teacher who has had the greatest impact on my life, right? And I actually didn't see her till about maybe 40 years after she had taught me. And I remember having a conversation with her and saying, you know, this is the woman who made sure when I write well. I dot my I's, I cross my T's in my handwriting, because she wouldn't accept anything less than perfect work. She will put a cross through your work. Today, we can't even put a cross through people's work, right? And say, go and do the work again.
We are having an impact on their self-esteem.
Yes, we're having an impact on their self-esteem. So if the work is mediocre, we still have to find a nice way to say, your work is mediocre. We can't say, actually, this is not good enough. And that in itself is also a problem. Right? Because we're raising children who can't take knocks. And life is not like that. Real life is not like that.
Charlie?
Real life is not like that. They will have knocks. They will go to work. Their work is not going to be good enough. They will be told their work is not good enough. And that will be a problem.
And they will need to defend that work.
Exactly.
And they will need to be able to also appreciate where they fall short.
Exactly.
And recalibrate and kind of get up and put in the work. Exactly. Or learn to, you know, be better and all of those things.
Absolutely. And again, if you haven't taught them to have a voice, how do they even articulate to defend that work, right? They can't defend that work when they don't have a voice, when they can't have an opinion. So they need to have an opinion, but do it in a way that is respectful. I always come back to this thing of being respectful, right? Because if you want your boss to listen to you, that's a way to say it, right? You can't say just anyhow.
So I'll tell you something about, my boss has a way he describes me. And every time he describes me that way, I smile. He calls me an iron fist in a velvet glove. And he says, you're good at what you do, but you do it with empathy, and you do it with, you work hard, you work long, you do what you need to do, but you always do it with lots of empathy and consideration for others. And I remember getting that feedback was very meaningful for me, right? And I look back on it and I think that feels good.
Absolutely.
Right? But I also think about that feedback, and I think about how do we then pass some of that on to other people, right? And how do we empower? And how do we teach our children and second line, set of line managers, right? To find the right balance between being good managers, good leaders, good, being able to deliver, but at the same time being able to, you know, do their jobs well, and, you know, work with empathy and consideration and all of those things, right? Now, it would be good to just get your point of view on, coming back to the conversation on just being in the workplace. How do you raise a child who is able to be in the workplace and thrive and understand that it's not personal?
Absolutely.
Right? You're there to do a job. And you're there to do it in a fashion that's balanced, right? But you start doing it from your work ethic as a child.
Just going back to that.
You get me? It doesn't start when you are in the workplace.
No.
It starts from class 6.
Home.
It starts from home.
It's how you're raised.
Okay.
Right? So it comes back to how you're raised, right? So if you are raised with responsibility as a child, so you're giving tasks at home, you know, we ignore all of that. You know, our children don't do anything. A lot of children don't do anything, right? But if you give children tasks at home, right, and children learn, so with my children, and I can only talk about mine, with my children, we talk about reward and consequence, right? And reward and consequence is a big conversation in my house. And I say to them, when you do something that you do it well, you get a reward. When you do something you don't do it well, that's a consequence, right? So you have to learn there's reward and there's consequence. And if I give you something to do, you have a responsibility to finish it and to do it well. And if you can't finish it, you need to come back to me and tell me why you can't finish it. And then maybe you need help. But if I don't know, I can't give you help if I don't know. And then we have a conversation, how do I give you help to do this? And it can be the simplest of things, from doing even household chores, right? If your child hasn't learned the responsibility of even tidying their bedroom, let's just keep it simple, right? You wake up, you make your bed, you tidy your room. And they can't do that. Why do you think when they get into an office and their boss gives them a job to do, they're going to do it, and they're going to do it well, and be able to respond to it? And I love what your boss said, because I actually agree that you're really good at that. You really are an iron fist in the world. I have had to learn that. So that for me was never my natural place to be. I was somebody who was quite blunt. Right?
So you were just the iron fist.
I was just the iron fist, no velvet glove business. You know,
you didn't go by Marrakesh markets and get the glove.
I mean, you did. You know, this is not good enough. It's not good enough. I mean, end of story. And you should know that it's not good enough. You know, why are we having that conversation? But I would like to think I have evolved emotionally. Yeah. So it's also about being emotionally intelligent. And with my children, what I tell my children is, you know, something I've learned, and I've tried so much to impact my children, is that it doesn't matter what your intention is. It's how you leave people feeling.
That's true.
So your intention can be the best in the world about what you're saying to someone. But the minute the person tells you, what you said made me feel this way, you need to be big enough to say, I am sorry. That's not what I meant to make you feel. That was not my intention, but I'm really sorry that made you feel that way. And then look at another way of rephrasing the same thing. Because sometimes it's the way you phrase it. It's like, I started by telling you, my son saying, Mommy, what you said doesn't make sense. And it's me teaching him how to rephrase the same thing. but rephrasing it in a way that doesn't make the person you're speaking to feel in a particular way. So that's the first thing. It's not about your intention. You can have the best of intentions, but if you say something that wounds someone, you need to acknowledge that pain, and you need to be able to say, okay, that's not what I meant. I'm really sorry you feel that way. This is what I meant, and have a dialogue. And the person will walk away feeling much better about it, right? So it's about how we raise our children. It's really important. And I always say to people, what kind of children are you raising, right?
But what happens when the parent doesn't even know better? Because there are lots of parents who don't know better. There are parents who are wealthy, have money, have social standing, but their value systems are all over the place, right?
Oh, gosh.
And so might not necessarily always understand the concept of raising a balanced child, or might not always understand the concept of, respect, consideration for others, empathy, might not always understand the different concepts that are around how, how do you make someone else feel, or consideration, and all of those things that you've just talked about, right? Is there, and this is us having to wrap up because there's someone who's looking at me, signaling me that we need to move on.
We need to move on.
But maybe final thoughts on what are some of the things that we can do as parents to give up our kids a voice, but also tool ourselves as parents to begin to, understand and learn, because there's no playbook.
Absolutely, there's no playbook. I mean, one of the first things I would say is that have conversations with your children, right? A lot of us parents have transactional relationships with our children. Okay. So we buy food, we put, give them clothes, whatever, but we don't actually spend quality time with our children having a conversation. Anyone who's picked up a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old from the school will know that as soon as you put that car in the car, they want to tell you about their day. Yeah. They want to tell you about their friends. They want to tell you about what has happened. Mommy. You need to make time to listen. So my cardinal rule was when I picked up my children between 3 and 6, I did not
You never used to pick up your phone.
I would not pick up my phone, and everybody who knows me knew that I would not pick up my phone.
That is so true. Between 3 and I don't know how you did that for years.
It was sacrosanct. Those were my children's time. That was the time it was mommy this, mommy that, do homework, Even my husband knew not to call me because I would not pick up my phone. And that was really important, having those conversations. So you can do things like that. You can have boundaries around your time. Mummies, we spend so much time on the phone yakking to our friends about all the things that they matter, but they don't really matter. You gave birth to that child. You are responsible for that child, and depending on what faith you're in, you'll be questioned about that child. So it is your job and your duty. They come first, not your friends and your conversation. So you need to make time for those children, right? Children do what we do.
They mimic us.
They mimic us, right? So if you are not respectful to the people around you, that's what your children learn. If you walk your child into school and they walk past the security guard and they don't say good morning, that's the child you're raising, right? So I think my last thought is that what kind of country do we want to have? We must remember that our children may be leaders, and if we raise leaders who have no compassion, oh boy, our country will be so more messed up than it is. So we need to raise children who have compassion and respect, but at the same time have a voice.
Thank you for that. And if I may, I would also say that we should also be willing to be open-minded and share experiences with other parents and other people.
Spot on.
Because you've taught me so much over time, and I'm sure that my stories also would teach you different things all the time.
Without a question.
You know what I mean?
And we've had these conversations
all the time we do.
Where it's like okay,
my children reporting me to you all the time.
And it's like, okay, I'm not doing this again.
Yes.
So yes,
thank you
need
so
to
much.
talk more. Thank you for having me. This has been excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you too.
So now to the fun part of all of this, cocktails. I get it's non-alcoholic, because I'm being a good girl today.
Okay.
You get to taste it and you get to tell me 2 things that are in it.
Mm.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see how you do. Stir it up.
Stir it up. More conversations.
More conversations, yes.
Gosh.
No, you're not gonna figure this out. Even I couldn't figure this out by myself. If I didn't know what was in it.
This is difficult. Lemonade or
None of those. Keep guessing.
wow.
One more guess.
Country?
Nope. Stir it up.
Stir it up.
I'm not telling you. On that note, love you. Mwah.